Hey everybody, welcome to another Jog video. It's your man Jake, as seen on TV, and you're watching gameplay while listening to my rants about any kind of topic. Let's just jump right in. We are now past the 7-month mark into the latest Israeli operation of invasion, occupation, destruction, ethnic cleansing, and genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza and parts of the West Bank. Tens of thousands of people have died, countless women and children included. The most recent casualty count includes more than 30,000 dead Palestinians, and these are only known deaths, with many, many, many more piling up. Over 2/3 of Gaza's hospitals have been decimated, with the remaining 10 to 12 hospitals barely remaining operational as of this recording. Olive trees, even old and sacred ones, have been destroyed. Historic Christian churches and Muslim mosques have been annihilated. Countless families and their heritage is lost. What a shame. The natural alliance between Jews, Christians, and Muslims continues to be destroyed by the hands of imperialism, Western civilization, and the interests of capital. Starved to death children have been found under the rubble. The hospitals ran out of body bags months ago. Endless testimonies posted online recount the dystopian hellscape that has become the Holy Land. Aid workers have been slaughtered. Dozens, if not hundreds, of journalists have perished under rain of fire. Several massacres ending hundreds of Palestinian lives. People merely seeking aid and refuge continue to occur back to back. Israeli officials have confidently dehumanized Palestinians in endless public statements, reaching truly Nazi levels of rhetoric. Israeli soldiers have posted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures on all kinds of social media platforms with the evidence of their own war crimes on full display. Make sure to check out Ugopnik's video on war crime influencers. All this terror, all of this death and suffering is done not in the Jewish name, but the Zionist name, Israel's name. The white settler colonial supremacist state is responsible for the 21st century's most abhorrent atrocity. And yet Zionism, Zionists, and the Zionist regime will all invoke the good name of Judaism in their every atrocity. As if Palestinians couldn't possibly be suffering under worse conditions, the second biggest group of people endangered by Israel is Jewish people, as anti-Semitism grows with every vile act Israel executes. Jews can never truly be safe as long as Israel exists. Jewish people can never truly exist peacefully and prosperously anywhere and everywhere in the world, just like everybody else, as long as Israel continues its apartheid regime. We must call these things out for what they are. We can't mince our words or cut descriptive corners. Appealing to the genocide enablers, the genocide apathetic, is no longer a viable option. Israel, America, Western imperialism, it all needs to change. In what I'm sure many of you recognize as a bizarre development, the United States has finally allowed a sliver of peace after they abstained in the most recent UN Security Council vote in favor of a ceasefire. As a Reuters article states, the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution on Monday, March 25th, demanding an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Palestinian militant Hamas after the United States abstained from the vote, sparking a spat with its ally Israel. The remaining 14 council members voted for the resolution proposed by the 10 elected members of the body that also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. There was applause in the council chamber after the vote. The United States has vetoed the previous 3 ceasefire resolutions. The language of the agreement specifically says the resolution determines the imperative for a, quote, sustained ceasefire, end quote. As the article continues, the United States government has specifically stated that despite the abstention, quote, our vote does not, and I repeat that does not represent a shift in our policy, White House spokesperson John Kirby told reporters. Nothing has changed about our policy. Nothing. Washington has been averse to the word ceasefire earlier in the nearly 6-month-old war, this is actually 7th as the time of this article, in the Gaza Strip, and had used its veto power to shield ally Israel as it retaliated against Hamas for an October 7th attack that Israel says killed 1,200 people. It was the Hamas massacre that started this war. Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan said, the resolution just voted upon makes it seem as if the war started by itself. Israel did not start this war, nor did Israel want this war. Allegedly. All garbage. All this is nonsense. Hamas welcomed the Security Council resolution, saying in a statement that it affirms readiness to engage in immediate prisoner swaps on both sides. End snippet quote. U.S. public officials attempted to claim the resolution is non-binding, with several clarifications in the mainstream international media requiring the acknowledgement that no, it is in fact a binding resolution. You can't get past that. As unbeknownst to many unknowledgeable Americans, every single UN resolution is binding. These attempts by U.S. diplomats and officials are classic imperial attempts to rewrite the script and rewrite the history of what's happened in order to not just serve their own interests and needs, but also to uphold their domestic and international image, aka preserve their global perception of legitimacy. In addition, at the very least, one Israeli hostage has perished under Hamas care, thanks to the drought of food, aid, and medicine in rightful Palestine. The revolutionary factions aren't able to adequately protect their captured hostages. Also, many Israeli hostages and straight-up civilians and citizens have also perished thanks to the reckless Israeli tactics. Interestingly, hundreds of rabid Zionists are occupying the border between Israel and Egypt, for example, harassing support and blocking aid from entering the Strip. This is occurring alongside the government of Israel doing everything in its power to deny any regional stability, in what is rightful Palestine. Yet, despite this supposed pivot in foreign policy, the Biden administration has sent more arms and aid to Israel after the resolution passed. After initially withholding a shipment of bombs, most likely as a PR tactic, Biden quite literally signed over $1 billion worth of arms to Israel. This exactly proves the ceasefire doesn't matter as long as provisions like internationally enforced arms embargo and even things like sanctions and blockades aren't included in the legislation. And now, mainstream media's latest hot-served garbage is producing so-called information that Biden allegedly called for a ceasefire the Thursday of April 4th, 2024. Only, upon closer look, we find Biden hasn't called for jack shit. Oh, yeah, no. So apparently, him and Netanyahu have some 30-minute conversation where Biden stressed the need for a resolution and that aid must go into the region. No threat of sanctions, no talks of ending arms sales and arms deliveries to Israel, no support of an arms embargo, no promises of reduction in American spending and investment into the Israeli government. Didn't even mention they would help support the humanitarian efforts. So, what is this, alleged piece of information in essence? A textbook example of spineless, milquetoast, corporate Democrat political foreign policy. It's yet another classic face of American blue fascism. I personally have a lot of concern, and I'm quite pessimistic. So much of my own personal frustration about anti-Israeli resistance and pro-Palestinian support, mainly in the Western civilization areas, and specifically in America, is surrounding the rhetorics, about the quest for a ceasefire and the insultingly peaceful protests which truly serve no real purpose for change. Put simply, governments wouldn't allow this type of so-called resistance, so-called peaceful protest, if it actually changed things. Now, would they? So why do we keep this strategy? I mean, it's definitely getting some, progress in some areas. Hence, we now see not only swaths of police branches attempting to disperse student encampments and any orchestrated occupations such as Columbia's renamed Heinz Hall. I think it was Columbia and the Heinz Hall or Heinz Hall. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that correctly. It's a historic site of anti-war demonstrations during the U.S. imperial invasion of Vietnam. And now it's yet another important site during this terrible genocide in Palestine. What incentive do capitalist states have to support popular dissent and resistance if it would jeopardize even an iota of their power? After all, when American women were rightfully enraged at the Supreme Court's overturn of Roe v. Wade, Congress expediently enacted protections for themselves and effectively banned protesting on, for example, any of their own residences. Oh, what a privilege it is to use the law to shield yourself from your own consequences. Definitely democratic, America is. U.S. intelligence agency government officials have all kinds of both public records and declassified documents revealing they blatantly support protests because they do nothing. And now that the bar has been set below the floor, we can say stuff like Biden pretending to call for a ceasefire is considered progress. The morality and common decency is so starved from this situation that the tide is turning is considered a legitimate morsel of hope. This is not the sign of progress. This is the sign of exhaustion and desperation. While the efforts of people's resistance from areas all around the world are certainly noteworthy and creating great momentum and change, and the tide is in fact turning thanks somewhat to the efforts of individuals of all kinds, we must accept reality and acknowledge the vast majority of our efforts are not causing the change that we need. All Western governments are complicit in genocide, and karma's reckoning will come to undo the terrors they have done to the world. America, specifically, and its perpetual legacy of destruction and oppression will be its own demise. Unrest across the nation has been going on and continues. with not just police interference attacking student protesters and even faculty members, but also Zionist counter-protesters, many likely to be undercover feds, were left unchecked after attacking, harassing, and beating student protesters existing peacefully in their university quads and buildings. Notably, during 1960s anti-war demonstrations, armed student protesters, yeah, you heard that right, armed student protesters occupied these buildings, and the U.S. police and military exhibited the exact same tactics we see in these modern times. Only this time, these student protesters are not only unarmed, but also many are being expelled from their universities, most even without their knowledge. The UN General Assembly, with over 140 member states supporting, recently passed a resolution seeking to grant Palestinian state recognition and membership in the UN of May 2024. This would grant not just Palestinian representation and such as like the ability to vote, make resolutions, make their voice heard on the international stage, etc., but this also helps further legitimize Palestinian nationhood on the international stage, regardless of Western media's and Western empire's diseased influence. Unfortunately, despite all of these changes in the UN, the dark truth is more Palestinians will die unless we take back our government and we continue to press them and make the changes that we must in our own hands, not asking for permission, not looking for forgiveness, taking back what is rightfully ours and preventing this terrible atrocity from continuing as if it should have ever started. All of these things are bad. The world is clearly not looking good in many ways, but there's more to the story than that. The people are waking up. Inside the imperial core and outside, the U.S. empire continues to wane and rot and decay. Multipolarity continues to rise, with China at the forefront to counter any U.S. attempts at more global influence. Say what you will about China, at least they support Palestinian statehood and even helped finalize peace talks in multiple regions. They also continue to offer economic alternatives to African and West Asian nations, as opposed to the strong-arm imperialist threats and domination of the West. Any criticism of nations like China must be done with a reminder of what our own Western nations are doing. The empire we call a country, America, land of the free, home of the brave, is slowly collapsing, and not many people inside the core have even the faintest idea or even willing to admit it, although many of them are waking up. In fact, active denial seems to be the first drug of choice for the Western labor aristocracy, despite a long list of problems. The constant mass shootings, the record drug abuse and suicide rates, the highest economic inequality in U.S. history, dystopian healthcare costs, impossible college prices, inflation, unaffordable housing and renting prices, wage slavery, rampant political incompetence and corruption, last-ditch U.S. military efforts abroad to snag pieces of the imperial pie, a supersaturated, quote, entertainment culture, end quote, distracting the populace, mass surveillance, militarized and authoritarian police force, toxic work culture, connection starvation, recession and revocation of women's rights, toxic positivity apologisms, transphobia, covert yet universal censorship, quiet assassinations of demonic figures like Epstein or unsung heroes like the Boeing whistleblower, whitewashed history, ableism, ageism, anti-LGBTQ laws passing, systemic anti-blackness. I mean, holy Christ, I could go on and on and on and on. The list does not stop there, obviously. All of these things, right? I mean, I said, it's terrible and there's more to the story. And, all of these things are clearly bad. And yet many Americans will cling to the empty hope embedded in this nation's culture. The American working class, if we want change, if we want things to be better, we must come to accept grim realities. We have no choice but to take our own lives into our own hands and make the changes we need and deserve. We are being made to commit the ultimate act of defiance. We are reaching the breaking point of imperial collapse. Concessions will not sustain us. Reform will not grant us the respite or peace we seek. Incrementalism, accelerationism, electoralism, adventurism, opportunism, revisionism, these things will not save us. They have not helped us. They only continue to insult us with their weak offerings to the needs of working people. We have seen the atrocities of imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, slavery, feudalism, exploitation, oppression, and so much more. We have seen the intentions of these forces. We've seen their impact. The world has been built by despots hungry for power and pleasure. Their appetites know no limits. Their depravity knows no end. Left unchecked, they will destroy the earth, and people all around the world will suffer for it. This must not happen. We must stand together. We must return to our working class roots and see implicit unity uncover itself as we discover the similarities of our wants and needs everywhere we look. Americans, while appearing divided along many lines, actually agree on many issues. When addressing and discussing these problems amongst ourselves, many of us actually feel quite similarly. Red and blue lines thought to be partisan obstructions unveil as weak barriers, dividing the people along an illusory line. We can choose unity. We can choose solidarity. We can choose to organize ourselves in a massive cultural revolution, taking to the streets, schools, libraries, stadiums, parking lots, stores, parks, fields, roads, and so much more to make our voices heard, to show exactly what we think and what is going on. We can make our own new system, our own new constitution, an entirely new democracy, and we don't need anyone's permission to do this. We are all worth so much more than we think, and we deserve so much better than what this current world is becoming. It's time for real change, and it's time we take that change into our own hands. All that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, or at least tolerated, everything I've said. Feel free to check out my other content and or let me know what you think. I hope everybody is doing all right. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace, and thank you again.